Hi, I'm Izzy and you're listening to From Newcastle. Today I'll be talking to Liz Todd, Professor of Educational Inclusion at Newcastle University, and Luke Bramhall, Poverty Proofing and Participation Service Manager at Children North East, about voices. The Voices project aims to understand the challenges that children and young people face in the context of COVID-19, particularly in economically disadvantaged areas of the North East. In this episode, we will hear why both Liz and Luke are so passionate about co-producing work with children, young people and their families, and why we need to give them a voice. A staggering 35% of children in the North East live in poverty, and it is clear from the project that one of the most powerful ways to support children and young people through these challenging times is to give them an opportunity to speak and to stop and really listen. Welcome, Liz and Luke. Would you like to introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about your work?
My name's Luke Bramhall. I am the Poverty Proofing and Participation Service Manager at Children North East. You can't say it too many times too quickly. So I look after kind of two key strands, which are in my job title: poverty proofing work at the charity and the participation work. Children North East, we're the oldest regional charity in the North East. Our head office is based in Newcastle, although we cover the whole region. And we've got an amazing history of how we set up as the Poor Children's Holiday Association kind of 130 years ago. In fact, this year's 130th anniversary.
Wow.
But great to be here anyway and talking with you, Izzy and Liz.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. And Liz?
So I'm Liz Todd. I'm Professor of Educational Inclusion. I'm also the Director of the Institute of Social Science. And I've been working at Newcastle University for more than 20 years. I've also worked as a teacher, I've worked as an educational psychologist. I've worked as a market stallholder, been a therapist.
Wow.
So I'm quite interested in a wide range of different things. I've been working with Luke and Children North East for quite a long time. And that's a really key focus of my work.
Oh, wow. So you've got your fingers in a lot of pies, it would seem. So can you just tell us a little bit more about your background and sort of what got you into this area of research and jobs?
I guess my history, obviously Liz has talked a bit about kind of her history. I also worked on a market stall when I was 14. So, the similar histories there as well. But, I'm a qualified teacher, but never really kind of ventured into the classroom. I did a lot of work with adult learning services. But my trade, so to speak, was youth work. That's kind of began my career, really. If you're fortunate enough to be in a job where your passions are, then it, absolutely makes all the difference. I know we're going to come on to talk about voices and this amazing project. You can see how both my passions and my careers to date really lends itself to that piece of work.
That's fantastic. And Liz, do you have a similar background? Have you always been child-focused in your career?
That's a really good way of asking the question, Izzy. I started off very child-focused, and I think that's what then got me to broaden my view and broaden the way I was thinking. If I can think back to when I started to be a teacher in a school, I was a maths teacher, in fact, for a couple of years. And one thing I realised, there was one boy in one of my classes that I realised if I spoke to him when he came in through the door and really focused and just said hello and asked how he was and he settled, and then he came into the class and everything was fine. If everything was difficult and I was distracted and he came in and didn't have that sort of initial conversation, I could have a really hard time that whole time and he wouldn't sort of manage. And that and a number of other things, such as realizing that my top set felt really, really rubbish about themselves, even though they were doing really well, that children often got on better in the theatre production that I ran, that was where I saw more of their thriving than in my maths classroom. Those kind of things showed me that what you see on the surface isn't what's necessarily going on, that there's a whole load of stuff going on for young people and their families that you don't see, that children can be really quite bright and that it can't come out in the systems that we have in schools. So I got into educational psychology because I was interested in how can I do something in a more systemic way about that. Then I found that a lot of my role as a psychologist was really stopping children from getting the resources that they needed, because I was part of the political systems and the difficulties that local authorities had in meeting those very diverse and individual needs. So that then led me to ask lots of questions. Like, why is this happening? Why do we not have systems that work? When local authorities want them to, when schools want them to, why does it not work like that? I was pushed into research and pushed into asking those questions and making a really thorough, critical look at all these different areas. But I never lost, and I have never lost my practice, and I've never lost interest in what I do having an impact and working with those people. And so I went from researching the whole area of special needs to actually thinking, okay, what gets in the way of community thriving, not just of children thriving? And that's what's led to the work that I do today.
Fantastic. And I think you've really hit the nail on the head there. I feel like children are sort of seen as these sort of simplistic sort of people in the world, and like adults have way more problems and they're going to have a lot more sort of mental and like issues with poverty. But I feel like within this research and the Voices Project, we are seeing that children are so telling of like what society is going to be like and how they're treated as well. The Voices Project covers the North East region and is working with 1,000 young people to understand the challenges that children and young people face in the context of COVID-19 disruption. Could you tell us a little bit more about the Voices Project?
At Children North East, we've been fortunate enough to work with Liz and her team at the university in the past through our poverty proofing work particularly, and had really kind of good relationships. Lockdown hit, and certainly from my perspective and my angle on it is that I was having lots of conversations with professionals across the board that were kind of saying, we're going to have to support children and young people. We're going to have to, deal with some anxieties and this desocialization and all these kind of things. And it kind of just led me to this kind of place of, do you know what? This is all guesswork. That's all we're doing. We're guessing what the needs of children and young people are going to be as a result of COVID. So really felt as though we needed to have a robust consultation and engagement with children and young people to make sure that not just, us as a charity, but, across the North East, there's so many professionals and sectors that input into the lives of children and young people. And this could all go wrong, in terms of that kind of recovery thing and how we respond.
And don't forget, Luke, it also came from the work that you've done in poverty proofing. Poverty proofing is a process to see how a school can stop unwitting the stigmatization of children who are living in poverty. By doing a kind of audit process of the school, but it's focused on at the heart of children's voices and consulting with those children, all the children in a school. Luke's been doing this work for a number of years and developed a massive range of different ways of working and different schools and different authorities doing it, and it's actually across the UK now. It gave us a platform for when COVID happened and we were both asking, what are children thinking and what do they need? Luke was already sending out packs that we were helping with, resource packs, because it's children. We know that there's a digital divide, but actually a lot of children didn't have even access to pen and paper and books and other things. So Children North East were putting together resource packs as well as the food packs that were going out to families in the North East. We put into that a kind of research pack that asked 3 questions. It had a space and paper to draw on or to write on, and said, draw or write answer to these 3 questions. What's been a challenge recently? What's been good recently? What's important to you right now? And we sent that out, and we asked children in that pack, would you be prepared to talk to us face to face or online, whatever is appropriate in terms of COVID? And we then started to do some online focus groups, but little by little, and we only didn't have much resource because we were doing it all part of our everything else without the resource. And then at the same time, the opportunity came up to apply for some government funding. And we applied for it, forgot all about it because I thought these sort of grants are very difficult to get. We won't get one. I'm sure we won't get it. So we forgot all about it, carried on doing our work anyway, carried on with the packs and with the focus groups. And I think we got up to, we call that a pilot phase now. And we actually managed to talk to 200 children and young people in that time. Anyway, we then heard a few months later that we had got the funding. And so that's enabled us to say that we are going to talk to 1,000 children and young people aged 5 to 18 in the 12 regional local authorities. We're going to look at the main themes. We've already identified those from our pilot work: health and wellbeing, culture and leisure, home and housing, transport, school, digital world and relationships.
There's something about, at the heart of all that, as Liz talked about those focus groups, was, what we needed to have was meaningful conversations with children and young people. And as Liz said, that's what's created this, amazing program called Poverty Proofing that we deliver, that Liz was talking about. It's all kind of based on meaningful kind of, those rich conversations with children and young people.
And how important is it that voices of children and young people are heard?
I mean, just straight up. My experience is that when we have co-produced and developed projects and programs, poverty proofing being one of them, throughout my career, with children and young people, and their voice has been the driving factor of it. They have been the most powerful. They have lasted the longest. They've been tested by the longevity of time. That in itself just tells me, do you know what? The most powerful thing we can do if we want to support children and young people right here, right now, as we respond to COVID, we have to listen to that voice, or else we're going to miss a big trick, and my experience tells me, I mean, as Liz talked about poverty proofing all began from a consultation with 1,000 children and young people across the Northeast. We've now spoken to over 100,000 children and young people across the country because the model, the program, and the power of the voice of children.
Liz, why is it so important for universities to learn from and work with local community organisations and charities?
Well, it's a wider question that I think it's so important for universities to work and be in and be responsive to the whole community. It's definitely, as part of that, it's important to work with local charities, but it's wider than that. And it includes businesses and individuals and other organisations. And that's not something that's a trivial thing to say because in recent years, some universities have become much more focused on funding and only thinking of the kind of international status of their research, how many students they can get in and that sort of thing. And what's been important to me about Newcastle University is that it's never lost sight of the importance of the community. Whilst of course we've got to manage to survive and we've got to have enough students, we've got to have excellent research. We definitely want to have excellent research and world-class research, but the community aspect is absolutely crucial. And we've actually just seen in quite an interesting way when football tried to go in a really business focused way, and the communities have brought that back. We saw that just recently with that bid for trying to sort of set up a kind of new European competition. We have continuing austerity. Austerity hasn't finished. We've got COVID, and universities are an anchor organisation in our communities that have a massive responsibility to work with other organisations in a co-produced way, not in a top-down way, but in a really working with people to actually seek local solutions and national and international solutions to suit some of these kind of wicked problems.
So I'll talk now about your findings and sort of the diversity of the group that you're using and sort of how representative do you think it is of either the country or as Newcastle in general?
So we set out not to have a fully diverse group in terms of we set out to have a group that was more disadvantaged, economically disadvantaged than not. And that was important because we think they are people who particularly don't normally have a voice and it's much easier quite often to hear the advantaged voice. So, and that was where we wanted to focus our research. However, we also took an ethical decision not to ask young people or families to actually divulge their economic circumstances. So that was quite an interest, and that was an ethical decision in terms of our sampling. So we don't want for people to feel stigmatized that they're being selected in that kind of way.
So how did you actually carry out research with a group of economically disadvantaged young people without asking them about their economic circumstances?
So we've done that by asking the schools to select in a mixed group, but have a good representation of young people who are from diverse groups, but also economically disadvantaged groups. We've also done that by going to schools in particular areas that we know are areas that are undergoing that are areas of greater child poverty. And so we know that of our sample, we have a higher proportion of that kind of area of young people. But within that, we want to have a diverse group. So we've gone to particular people we know amongst the Northeast and asked them for particular groups. So we're diverse in terms of disability, in terms of looked after children, in terms of Black and ethnic minorities, BAME groups of young people, and sexualities. And it's very important to us that we talk to young people who from diverse backgrounds and diverse different protected characteristics. That's crucial.
You mentioned that you're still at an early stage of the Voices project, but can you share any of your findings with us?
From our initial findings, which I won't go into detail, but 3 things came out that we then wanted to act on. One was around employment, because young people were saying to us that they're really worried about, do they have a future? So we wanted to try to get in touch and put young people in touch with employers' organisations to see what could happen in the Northeast to reassure young people. So that is happening. Transport, the one thing that whilst children didn't like online learning, there were some that did. So it was kind of an equivocal thing. Whilst there were things that they didn't like about all kinds of things that were happening, there was one thing they were universal dislike of, and that was travelling by public transport. And we thought, well, let's try and get these young people together with the transport providers. Transport providers have been really, really responsive, and we're in a process now. We've met with them. They're very keen to talk to the young people we've been talking to. And also the other area is social interaction, that whilst, yes, it is important to try to catch up with children's learning, what children and young people are telling us that they really miss most is the connection with other young people and having activities and opportunities that connect with other young people. So we're going to have an event where we've showcased some really good ways of doing that. One thing is people say, oh, I didn't realize that we should be thinking of more than just schools about young people. I didn't realize that transport would be something they'd be worried about. I didn't realize employment. They're saying, oh, it's quite a lot of different things then that we have to think about with young people, is it? When you're talking about mental health, it's not just asking people, do you have anxiety? It's actually all these different things are important for children's and young people's mental health. You've got to think about transport. You've got to think about their digital world. You've got to think about their relationships and their access to culture and leisure. You can't leave those out when you're thinking about their mental health. And that's the academic thing I'm bringing to this. That's my academic analysis. It's this holistic way of thinking about young people's lives and not just saying, do they have anxiety? Let's give them something to stop their anxiety.
And that's not what's going to kind of make the difference. I guess what we recognize is that particularly anxiety, that seems to be a thing that's in terms of, there are anxieties about future employment. There are anxieties about parental employment. There's anxieties about public transport. But yet, underneath all of that, children and young people are just desperate to see each other face to face. And that's, I think, again, I've had some of the reactions I've had to that one, Liz, is this kind of lots of professionals that are sick of Zoom or Teams or whatever. What's really interesting is that children and young people are sick of Zoom and Teams and that kind of idea. They want interaction. And of course they do, and I think that that's a really fascinating thing. What's also was interesting about that whole kind of this whole digital world kind of discussions that we've had is children and young people talking about the fact that they enjoy being online and gaming and doing those kinds of things. And that's part of their norm and they want to continue that. And that's been a really important part of many children's social interaction.
The most recent figures indicate that 4.3 million or 31% of children in the UK were living in poverty. In the North East, 35% of all children and young people were living in poverty even before the pandemic hit. I wanted to just get onto this fact about children's wellbeing and how it can be a little bit forgotten in terms of government. And do you think there's something they can do to improve it? Is something not working within the government, or should they be doing more schemes, or is it down to people like you two who should be just doing this research?
There's two things I would want from the government. It'd be interesting to ask Luke to see what Luke says to answer this question. But my two things are that they should have clear poverty targets and they should reduce and eliminate poverty. And that is actually completely within the government's purview. The other thing we could have is similar to Wales. Wales has a Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, which means that everything that the government puts out has to look at how is whatever they're going to do going to support the well-being of future generations. Now, that is quite a powerful and quite a challenging thing that Wales has in its kind of armory of policy and legislation. I know there's always a reluctance of different governments within the UK to copy what other people do, but actually that's quite innovative. And it's more than just saying, let's meet children's needs or let's listen to children. You can put climate change within that. You can put poverty in that. You can put how do we think about education? So those are the two. I mean, I don't actually think they're terribly radical, but
I guess the other thing, which I think probably I've thought about more over the last few months as a result of Voices than I have done for a long time, certainly, which is the other end. So that kind of, through education and that shift into employment or further education. And I think that there's some real challenges, and we see it as a charity with some of the older young people that we work with who have maybe struggled a bit through school or maybe kind of struggling a bit with some mental health kind of challenges. But how then they're put into this kind of, the rat race, so to speak. And it just feels inaccessible. I mean, right now, as a result of COVID, we spoke to a group a few weeks ago who hopefully are going to be engaging with us, through with businesses and the Chamber of Commerce. And they would just, even just very practical things like, do you know what? We're not going to get our vaccinations till last. So we've lost all hope of getting any part-time employment. Never mind full-time employment, because we're bottom of the pile. So,
And I think that is really important actually to think, because I know children, I know that there's less risk, but for young people, it's yet another way that they are being, that their lot is difficult at the moment.
No, I feel this as a university student as well. Obviously, I'm not in the younger bracket, but we're sort of the last ones to get the vaccine, yet we're the ones who are paying money or we need to go into classrooms and learn practically. And it's just so silly that, I don't know, I feel like obviously the older people should be the ones protected, but I feel like between the ages of 14, 25, maybe let them sort of get the backseat and then give it to us. But that's just sort of a selfish bias reason. But
no, and I think there's something about this whole kind of this project, which is about, do you know what, that voice needs to be heard. And not just heard. I think that one of the joys of this project, and one of the beauties, if you like, of it, is that this isn't just about listening to the voices of children and young people. This is about taking the voices of children and young people and making sure that that's put right in front of the faces of key decision makers within sectors across the piece.
And that's what we're doing. We are immediately taking our findings and putting them to try and have an impact. We're not waiting till further follow-on funding. It is part of the project. We're taking, the minute we have some findings, we're taking those to the people that need to hear it.
We're getting young people to be talking to those, transport leaders. And that's how it should be. And do you know what? And Liz and I have talked about this. That shouldn't stop. That shouldn't just be a COVID thing. That should be the way that our society is made up. We can have a society that is designed where children and young people's voice matters. And that's what we want.
Oh, that's really great. That is something that gives me great joy, that sort of adults are seeing this problem that young people are facing, because we just feel like our voices are just not being heard. And it's so great that you two are sort of delving into these issues and doing some really great research.
Well, we would love to know. We'd love to find a way to hear the student voice more as well. So that was also something.
I'm happy to talk to you about it and get loads of people. I'm sure many people would love to scream and shout about the sort of problems with COVID. I'd like to talk now about how the pandemic has affected your research and how you've adapted.
Yeah, it's been interesting. And I think that actually our relationship and the team in terms of voices, actually that wider team has really lent itself. So at Children North East, obviously a lot of our work is steeped in consultation, the poverty proofing work, for example, and we've moved basically all our consultation online and being able to do that. And we went through a real kind of journey around, how do we do that? What are the safeguards that we need to do? How does that impact consent, et cetera, et cetera? So we've really kind of grappled with these different issues. Lots of parents, particularly this latest lockdown in January, they were offered laptops, but they were saying, well, no, we don't want them. And I think that, there's some fear about breakages. And if you can't afford to fix it, then, there's going to be some challenges there. But actually, something about there's so many more. It's so much more complex than that, and families just really struggling, and maybe at times not able to speak to the school about those struggles, struggling with routine, struggling with their own kind of well-being and mental health. And this is parents, and obviously then suddenly you've got to homeschool. We've been also delivering some kind of consultation and support over the phone to parents and the children.
That's really interesting. So what kind of issues have families faced during the pandemic?
Yeah, routines and routine's been a real big one. Even just things like getting out and going for a walk and feeling as though that's okay to get out and go for a walk during the school day. Very practical things like navigate the laptop, because if you don't know, if you've not got a laptop or being shown, then that's really difficult. So all sorts of kind of really interesting things. And as I say, there's something about relationships, and that's been really important.
Have you seen a definitive shift in sort of the mindset between, for example, like a 7-year-old versus a 16-year-old, or is it sort of similar to how they've adapted with the pandemic? And
so We haven't got enough results for me to say definitively at all to answer your question. What I can say is that, yes, there's very different things that those different ages say. And an example that I heard very recently when we had our team meeting this week, and I was saying, what are you hearing at the moment? The people who are doing the focus groups at the moment. And they're starting to find now, one person was starting to find that the people young people they were speaking to, these are older young people, are starting to feel more positive. Their conversation is less in terms of the pandemic and more in terms of just life. The whole employment concern, of course, is only a concern to the older young people. It's not something that the younger young people have been talking about. But everybody's been talking about not seeing people dear to them, and not seeing friends.
Yeah, I feel like that's something that people forget. School is not just about learning, it's writing in a notebook or whatever. It's about making those friendships, making those connections, like advancing those social skills that we sort of have been taught throughout life. That's where we go to school to make friends and stuff. And have you noticed, have children sort of lost friendships? How are they dealing with this like lack of socialization?
They're finding it really, really hard. We've also found that they've really stuck to the rules, and they've been very critical of adults that haven't. But we've noticed in our answers how much they've stuck to the rules and really tried. They see the inconsistencies and the contradictions in, I can see somebody and sit next to them in school, and I can't go around to their house. And that's been really, really hard. But there's so many of those kind of contradictions in everybody's lives.
And how can people get involved in the Voices Project?
We're very keen for anybody to get involved with us. If you're a charity, if you're a school, if you're a youth organisation, and you think that your young people would give permission, anybody who thinks that they would like to start the conversation with us about that and have their young people being involved if they would want to be, we would like to hear from them. Anybody, young people from the age of 5 to 18, we're still looking for those organisations, and we're very keen to speak to them. We want anyone who works with children and young people. But those are the other people we'd like to be in touch. So if you're an organisation and you want to change in response to children's views, and you want to have clearer access to our findings, and you want to be a case study of how you make those changes, we also want to hear from you.
Oh, perfect. And sort of going towards the end again, it's like, what do you think the future holds for this project? What do you want to get out of it? What are you hoping is going to be a result of this?
So we're hoping and expecting that we're going to get some really interesting, changing, shifting ideas from young people over the different phases of the pandemic. We are hoping and expecting that through that, the asks that we're going to have on policymakers, on practitioners, is going to change. At the moment, it's about, as I said, employment, transport, and activities involving social interaction. That we're expecting in our next phase that's going to change or be added to. But we also want to have a national response. And part of the case of getting the funding was that by having a large sample across the Northeast, given the kind of nature of the Northeast and the number of children living in poverty, which is really high, 35% of young people before COVID lived in poverty, but it's higher now. But we think that because of the kind of nature of the Northeast, and it's a really varied areas with urban areas and coastal regions and very rural areas, that we think that our findings are the kinds of findings that we think would be of great interest across the country. So we want also to influence the whole of the nation.
So finally, a question I'd like to ask is, what is your favourite thing about Newcastle?
Newcastle and the Northeast indeed. Newcastle's really important to me. It's at the moment, it's diversity. It's incredible diversity. And within that, its sense of community and friendliness is really important. And it's just a place that's very livable. Therefore, I'm very active. I cycle a lot. I can cycle for long distances. I can reach the mountains and the sea. And that's important as well.
Oh yeah, I can completely agree with you there. Newcastle is like the best place in the world, I think. Thank you, Liz and Luke. If you would like to find out more about the Voices Project or any of the other projects discussed in the series, visit podcast.ncl.ac.uk/From Newcastle. Next time, we will be joined by Professor Ruth Plummer to learn about her groundbreaking research on the Geordie cancer drug Rubraca. Thank you for listening to this episode of From Newcastle. If you enjoyed it, then please click the subscribe button. We love to hear your comments or suggestions, so please get in touch at fromnewcastlepodcast@ncl.ac.uk or via social media @FromNCL Podcast.